Inside Holman Prison, America's execution chamber. The prison where executions never stopped. There are prisons that punish. There are prisons that isolate. And then there are prisons built around death itself. Deep in southern Alabama stands a correctional facility that has witnessed some of the state's most violent offenders, some of its longest-serving inmates, and nearly every execution carried out in Alabama for decades. This is Holman Correctional Facility. To some, it is simply another maximum security prison. To others, it is known by a far darker name: America's execution chamber. Behind its walls are men serving life sentences, inmates who have spent decades on death row, and prisoners who wake up every day knowing that one day their final walk may begin just a few hundred feet from their cell. But Holman is more than an execution site. It is a world governed by fear, reputation, survival, and routines that rarely change. A place where violence has erupted without warning. A place where correctional officers have faced extraordinary risks. And a place where some prisoners have spent so many years behind bars that they have watched entire generations pass from inside a concrete cell. Tonight, we go inside one of America's most infamous prisons. And what happens behind these walls is far more complicated than most people imagine. Before we begin, subscribe for more documentaries exploring prisons, crime, and justice systems around the world. And leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. Because the story of Holman Prison is one that continues to raise difficult questions about punishment, security, and what happens when human beings spend decades waiting for the end. The birth of Holman. Holman Correctional Facility opened in 1969 in Atmore, Alabama. The prison was originally designed to house some of the state's most serious offenders. At the time, Alabama's correctional system was expanding rapidly. Officials believed larger institutions would improve security and create more organized management of prisoners serving long sentences. On paper, Holman looked modern. The facility was designed to contain dangerous inmates while maintaining order through strict supervision. But over time, something else happened. The prison gradually became the center of Alabama's death penalty system. Executions that once occurred elsewhere became concentrated at Holman. Death row inmates were transferred there. Execution facilities were established there. And eventually, the prison's identity became inseparable from capital punishment. For decades, if Alabama carried out an execution, it happened at Holman. That fact alone changed everything. Because housing death row inmates creates a prison environment unlike any other. The psychological atmosphere is different. The security requirements are different. Even the passage of time feels different. Many inmates arrive knowing they may never leave alive. And when years become decades, strange things begin to happen. Some prisoners lose hope. Some become deeply religious. Others spend years fighting appeals while waiting for decisions that may never come. What would life feel like if every day carried the possibility of being your last? That question hangs over Holman like a permanent shadow. And deeper inside the prison, the reality becomes even harder to understand. Entering the world of Holman. For anyone entering Holman, the first thing they notice is not the noise. It is the atmosphere. Many former staff members have described the prison as tense. Not necessarily chaotic every moment. Not constantly violent. But tense. The kind of tension that comes from housing hundreds of men with long criminal histories inside an aging institution. The prison has struggled with overcrowding for years. Like many correctional facilities across Alabama, Holman has often housed more inmates than it was originally designed for. That creates pressure. Pressure on staff. Pressure on resources. Pressure on inmates. And pressure inside prisons can become dangerous very quickly. A disagreement over respect. A debt. A gang conflict. A misunderstanding. Any of these can trigger violence. The reality is that many prisoners arrive at Holman after spending years moving through Alabama's correctional system. They understand prison politics. They understand prison hierarchy. And they understand that survival often depends on reading situations correctly. One wrong decision can have consequences that last for years. Sometimes longer. But understanding life inside Holman requires understanding who controls daily life. And that story begins with power. The unwritten rules. Officially, correctional officers run the prison. Unofficially, daily life can be influenced by a complicated network of inmate relationships. Every prison develops social structures. Holman is no exception. New arrivals quickly learn that prison operates under two sets of rules. The written rules. And the unwritten ones. The written rules are posted. The unwritten rules are learned through observation. Who sits where? Who talks to whom? Who owes money? Who controls contraband? Who can be trusted? And who cannot? Ignoring these realities can create serious problems. Many inmates spend their first weeks studying the environment. Listening more than speaking. Watching more than acting. Learning who carries influence. Because influence inside prison does not always come from physical strength. Sometimes it comes from reputation. Sometimes it comes from connections. Sometimes it comes from decades of experience surviving behind bars. The men who understand prison culture often avoid unnecessary conflicts. They know violence attracts attention. Attention attracts restrictions. Restrictions make life harder. Yet despite these realities, violence remains part of Holman's history. And some of the incidents that occurred here shocked even experienced corrections officials. What happened next would expose just how dangerous the prison environment had become. Violence behind the walls. Holman has experienced numerous violent incidents throughout its history. Assaults, stabbings, officer attacks, inmate conflicts. Many factors contribute to prison violence. Overcrowding, limited resources, gang rivalries, mental health challenges, long-term incarceration. When these pressures combine, the results can be explosive. Several incidents over the years drew national attention. In some cases, correctional officers were attacked while attempting to maintain order. In other cases, inmate-on-inmate violence exposed deeper problems within the prison system. Former inmates have often described a reality where maintaining awareness was essential. Walking to meals, using showers, moving through common areas. Every activity required attention. Because danger rarely announced itself beforehand. And yet, despite these risks, daily life continued. Breakfast was served. Cells opened. Work assignments began. The prison kept functioning. Perhaps that is one of the strangest aspects of institutions like Holman. Extraordinary events occur within an environment built around routine. Life moves forward even after violence. The next meal arrives. The next count begins. The next day starts. But nowhere is the contrast between routine and mortality more visible than on death row itself. And beyond those doors lies the part of Holman that made it infamous. Life on Alabama's death row. For decades, Holman housed Alabama's male death row population. These inmates lived under conditions different from the general population. Security was tighter. Movement was more restricted. The future was uncertain. Some inmates spent 20 years waiting. Others spent 30. A few remained on death row even longer. Imagine living year after year knowing your execution date could eventually arrive. How would that affect your mind? Many prisoners developed routines. Reading, writing, legal research, exercise, religious study, correspondence with family. Routine became a survival mechanism. Without structure, time could become overwhelming. Days turned into months. Months became years. Years became decades. Some inmates watched younger prisoners arrive and grow old while they remained in the same housing unit. Others saw appeals succeed. Some watched fellow death row inmates leave for the execution chamber. And every time that happened, the entire unit felt it. No matter what crimes had been committed, everyone understood what was about to happen. A human life was reaching its final hours. And inside Holman, those moments followed a process unlike anything else in American corrections. The procedure was precise, controlled, and deeply unsettling. The final walk. Executions at Holman followed carefully established procedures. In the days before an execution, security measures increased. Staff prepared. Legal developments were monitored. Media attention intensified. For the inmate, time took on a different meaning. Every phone call mattered. Every visit mattered. Every hour mattered. Some inmates spent final days meeting family members. Others spoke with attorneys. Many met with religious advisors. Then came the final movement. The final transfer. The final preparations. The process was designed to maintain order and consistency. Yet no procedure can remove the emotional weight of what is occurring. Correctional officers involved in executions often describe the experience as one of the most difficult responsibilities in their careers. Many carried those memories long after retirement. Because unlike ordinary prison duties, executions end with a certainty that cannot be reversed. For decades, Holman became the location where Alabama carried out these sentences. And as the years passed, debates surrounding capital punishment only grew louder. But inside the prison, another crisis was developing. One that had nothing to do with executions. And everything to do with the prison itself. The staffing crisis. One of the greatest challenges facing Holman has been staffing. For years, Alabama's prison system struggled to recruit and retain correctional officers. The problem affected security, morale, and daily operations. When staffing levels fall, officers are responsible for supervising larger numbers of inmates. Response times become slower. Fatigue increases. Stress grows. At Holman, these pressures became particularly significant because of the prison's security classification and death row responsibilities. Many officers worked demanding shifts. Some faced dangerous situations with limited backup. Others described chronic exhaustion. Maintaining order inside a prison requires personnel. Without enough trained staff, every challenge becomes harder. And those challenges were already considerable. Yet even amid these difficulties, Holman continued operating. The gates opened every morning. Counts were conducted. Meals were served. And the prison machine kept moving. But what was daily life actually like for the men living there? The answer is far more monotonous, and far more psychologically demanding, than most people realize. Surviving another day. For most inmates, survival at Holman was not about dramatic events. It was about consistency. Wake up. Count. Breakfast. Movement. Recreation. Lockdown. Count again. Repeat. The routine rarely changed. But routine does not mean comfort. Cells could feel claustrophobic. Noise could become constant. Privacy was almost non-existent. Many inmates learned to manage stress through personal rituals. Reading books repeatedly. Exercising in confined spaces. Writing journals. Studying religion. Maintaining correspondence. Others struggled. Years of confinement can affect mental health in profound ways. Isolation. Depression. Anxiety. Hopelessness. These experiences appear throughout correctional systems worldwide. And Holman was no exception. Yet despite everything, many prisoners continued adapting. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to adjust to environments that seem unimaginable from the outside. But adaptation comes with a cost. And nowhere is that cost more visible than among prisoners who have spent decades behind bars. Their stories reveal a side of Holman that statistics alone can never explain. Men who grew old waiting to die. Time behaves differently on death row. Outside prison walls, years are marked by careers, marriages, children, and milestones. Inside Holman's death row unit, years were often measured by appeals, court rulings, and the names of prisoners who occupied neighboring cells. Some inmates arrived in their 20s. They reached middle age behind bars. Others entered death row before many correctional officers working the facility today had even begun their careers. The average American might struggle to imagine spending decades waiting for a sentence to be carried out. Yet for many prisoners, that became reality. Court appeals moved slowly. New evidence occasionally emerged. Changes in law created additional legal challenges. Execution dates were scheduled and sometimes postponed. For some men, hope remained alive for years. For others, hope gradually disappeared. Former death row inmates have described a strange psychological balance. On one hand, they understood the possibility of execution. On the other, daily life demanded attention. Meals still arrived. Letters still came through the mail. Conversations still happened. Life continued even while death remained a constant presence. Some prisoners became deeply involved in religion. Others spent thousands of hours researching legal issues. A few pursued educational opportunities. Many developed routines so precise they could describe every hour of their day. Perhaps that routine served a purpose. Because without structure, the weight of uncertainty could become unbearable. And uncertainty was something every man on death row understood. Especially when an execution date appeared on the calendar. When an execution became imminent, the atmosphere often changed. Conversations became quieter. Movement seemed slower. Even prisoners who rarely spoke about emotions understood what was happening. One of their own was approaching the end. No matter how hardened a person became, moments like these carried weight. And while death row received most of the public attention, another world existed elsewhere inside Holman. A world shaped by prison economics. Because wherever large numbers of people live together under strict restrictions, an underground economy eventually emerges. And Holman was no different. The hidden economy. Officially, prisons control nearly every aspect of daily life. Food, clothing, housing, movement, communication. But prisons also create scarcity. And scarcity creates value. Inside Holman, as in many correctional institutions, everyday items could become currency. A package of instant coffee. A snack from the commissary. A postage stamp. A phone call. A favor. The underground economy operated through relationships and trust. Sometimes debts were repaid without issue. Sometimes they became sources of conflict. Experienced inmates often understood an important survival rule. Never borrow what you cannot repay. That lesson appears in prisons across America. Because unpaid debts can trigger disputes that quickly escalate. Former inmates frequently described prison economics as one of the most important forces shaping daily life. Not because it was glamorous, but because it affected everything. Who had influence? Who had resources? Who owed favors? Who controlled access to desired items? The system existed beneath the official structure of prison administration, invisible to outsiders, yet deeply significant to those living inside. And when disputes emerged, prison officials often faced difficult decisions. Because not every conflict could be prevented. Not every threat could be identified beforehand. And some tensions eventually exploded into violence. What happened in the next chapter reveals just how fragile order inside a maximum security prison can become. When control breaks down, every prison depends upon a delicate balance. Rules must be enforced. Staff must maintain authority. Inmates must believe that consequences exist for violating those rules. When that balance weakens, danger increases. Over the years, Holman experienced periods of serious instability. Several high-profile incidents drew national attention. In some cases, inmates assaulted one another. In others, correctional officers became targets. One particularly alarming reality involved homemade weapons. Prisons restrict access to dangerous items. Yet determined inmates have repeatedly demonstrated creativity when constructing weapons from ordinary materials. Metal fragments, pieces of plastic, sharpened objects. Items that seem harmless can become dangerous in the wrong hands. For correctional officers, every search mattered. Every inspection mattered. Every intelligence report mattered. Because discovering a weapon before it is used can prevent tragedy. The challenge becomes even greater inside aging facilities. Blind spots emerge. Infrastructure deteriorates. Maintenance becomes more difficult. Security operations become increasingly complex. Many experts have argued that overcrowding amplifies these risks. More inmates mean more pressure on housing units. More competition for resources. More opportunities for conflict. And at Holman, these issues became recurring concerns. Yet amid the dangers, another side of prison life often goes unnoticed. A side focused not on violence but on transformation. Because even inside one of America's most notorious prisons, some inmates attempted to rebuild their lives. And their stories reveal a very different side of Holman. Faith, redemption, and second chances. For many prisoners, religion became a source of stability. The reasons varied. Some sought forgiveness. Some searched for meaning. Others simply needed hope. Inside Holman, religious programs have long played a significant role in prison life. Christian ministries, Bible studies, volunteer programs, counseling initiatives. These activities offered structure in an environment where structure could mean everything. Former staff members often noted that inmates involved in educational and religious programs sometimes displayed lower levels of disciplinary problems. That did not erase past crimes. Nor did it erase victims. But it revealed an important reality. Human beings remain complex, even inside prison. Some prisoners entered Holman as violent young men and gradually became different people over decades of incarceration. Others dedicated themselves to mentoring younger inmates. A few spent years helping fellow prisoners learn to read. Many developed relationships with chaplains who visited regularly. For death row inmates especially, spiritual questions often became impossible to ignore. What happens after death? Can someone truly change? Can forgiveness exist alongside accountability? These questions have no simple answers. Yet they remained part of daily life inside Holman. And nowhere were those questions more visible than during an inmate's final days. Because as execution dates approached, many prisoners turned toward faith. Sometimes for comfort. Sometimes for reconciliation. And sometimes because they had nowhere else to turn. The officers who walked the tiers. When people discuss prisons, attention often focuses on inmates. But thousands of correctional officers have also spent their lives inside Holman's walls. Their experience is rarely simple. Every day, officers enter an environment where vigilance is essential. They supervise individuals convicted of serious crimes. They respond to emergencies. They manage conflicts. And they do so while maintaining professionalism under considerable pressure. Many officers developed strong situational awareness. Reading body language. Identifying tension. Recognizing signs that trouble might be developing. Those instincts often came from years of experience. Because inside prison, small details matter. An unusual conversation. A sudden silence. A change in routine. These observations can provide early warning signs. Yet correctional work also carries emotional burdens. Officers witness violence. They deliver difficult news. Some participate in execution procedures. Others respond to medical emergencies. Many carry those experiences home. Despite public perception, correctional work is often among the least understood professions in criminal justice. And at Holman, the demands were especially intense. Because every day involved balancing security, safety, and human complexity. It was a responsibility that rarely ended when a shift concluded. And in recent years, those responsibilities entered a new and controversial chapter. One that placed Holman at the center of international attention. A new era of executions. For decades, lethal injection served as Alabama's primary execution method. But legal challenges, pharmaceutical shortages, and broader debates surrounding capital punishment created new complications. Then Alabama moved toward a method that few places in the world had ever used. Nitrogen gas execution. The decision generated intense debate. Supporters argued it offered an alternative when other methods became difficult to implement. Critics raised ethical concerns and questioned potential consequences. Regardless of opinion, the change placed Holman back in national headlines. Reporters gathered outside the prison. Legal experts analyzed developments. Human rights organizations expressed concerns. Families of victims followed updates closely. Families of inmates did the same. Once again, Holman became the focal point of a much larger conversation. A conversation extending far beyond Alabama. A conversation about punishment, justice, and the role of the death penalty in modern society. Yet while public attention focused on executions, many long-standing challenges remained inside the prison itself. Overcrowding. Staffing shortages. Infrastructure concerns. Safety issues. Questions about reform. Questions about funding. Questions about the future. And those questions lead directly to the final chapter of Holman's story. The future of America's execution chamber. Today, Holman Correctional Facility stands as both a functioning prison and a symbol. A symbol of America's long debate over punishment. A symbol of the challenges facing correctional systems. And a symbol of how difficult it can be to balance justice, safety, accountability, and humanity. For some, Holman represents necessary punishment for serious crimes. For others, it reflects deeper problems within the prison system. Few places capture those competing perspectives more clearly. Inside its walls are correctional officers trying to maintain order. Inmates serving life sentences. Men waiting on death row. Families seeking closure. Families seeking mercy. And all of them exist within the same institution. The future remains uncertain. Prison reforms continue to be debated. New facilities have been proposed. Legal challenges continue. Political priorities change. Yet Holman's place in American correctional history is already secure. Because for more than half a century, this prison has stood at the intersection of crime, punishment, and mortality. And few institutions have carried that burden longer. Holman Prison is often remembered for one thing: executions. But reducing it to that single image overlooks a much larger story. It is a story about power and confinement. About violence and routine. About officers and inmates. About fear, survival, and the passage of time. Within these walls, men have spent decades waiting for freedom that never came. Others have spent decades waiting for death. Some entered as young adults and became old men behind bars. Some never left at all. The prison's concrete walls, steel doors, and razor wire were built to contain human beings. Yet they also contain countless stories. Stories of crimes. Stories of punishment. Stories of regret. And stories that remain difficult to explain. Perhaps that is why Holman continues to fascinate people. Because beyond the headlines and beyond the executions lies a question that has never been fully answered. What should a prison ultimately be? A place of punishment? A place of rehabilitation? A place of deterrence? Or something else entirely? Inside Alabama's most infamous prison, that question still echoes through the corridors. And for now, the answer remains locked behind the walls of America's execution chamber. As the lights go out inside Holman Prison, the questions remain. Behind these walls are stories of crime, punishment, survival, and the difficult choices that shape the justice system. For decades, Holman has stood at the center of some of America's most controversial debates, leaving a legacy that continues to this day. What are your thoughts on life inside Holman Prison and the role it has played in American corrections? Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth stories from behind prison walls. Until next time, stay safe and keep seeking the truth behind the headlines.